The Drums of War, Chapter 50. Hail the victorious dead. In a destroyer bay on the speaking softly. The space usually used to house one of the big stick destroyers was cavernous, and the somber silence filled the space sank into Captain Lena Chen's very bones. She couldn't really call the Republic stuck-up pricks after all they'd done for her and hers, but she wasn't ever going to admit as much out loud. Hell, they didn't even toss her into the brig when she stuck that engineer. She figured apologizing went some way, but maybe all sailors would understand how she felt. He had told her that the warp speed battle wagon was dead. Her reactor was wrecked, her hyperdrive was fried, and her shield generators were snagged. Her hull was more whole than metal, and her keel had been broken in 3 places. She'd have to be rebuilt bolt by bolt, and by then she wouldn't be the same ship anymore. She had to hit something, and that engineer was right there. Her nose was stuffy, her eyes were puffy, her shoulders were hunched, and her hands would have been shaking if she didn't grip the safety railing, where she stood looking at the twisted wreck of her home held in a set of massive docking clamps intended for a much larger ship. The engineers said that they don't know how it happened, but the reactor should have gone critical. Captain Lena Chen and her crew should have gone out with the warp-speed battle wagon in a blaze of vengeful glory, with Marcus ringing from their furious throats. The reactor went cold at that very last second instead. Captain Lena Chen agreed with the old salts, who said the old girl had a soul and had chosen to protect her beloved crew. Marcus was still in the morgue of the Jupiter's Might, being taken care of by the Romans. She had an idea to honor both the warp-speed battle wagon and her fallen crewmate. They just had to find a place where Marcus and the warp-speed battle wagon could rest together in peace. One day, Captain Lena Chen would join her Marcus there, once she'd lived enough for both of them. One of those old salts in a blue technician's jumpsuit sidled up beside her on the catwalk. He was a tabby big kitty, but his fur was so grey that it was hard to tell at this point. Captain Lena Chen was thinking about telling him to fuck off, but he was just looking down at the warp-speed battle wagon with respect. He reached inside his jumpsuit and pulled out a flask from the inside pocket. He took a swig and passed it on to Captain Lena Chen, saying, "Hail the victorious dead!" Captain Lena Chen took the flask and a strong pull of whiskey inside before replying, "Hail the victorious dead." Aboard the Dan Daily. The enlisted mess was a strange combination of boisterous celebration, quiet contemplation, and raw grief. Lance Corporal Maxwell Calhoun had just finished shotgunning 3 beers to celebrate how fucking alive he was. But then it hit him again. Not everyone made it off that rock to drink with him. Specialist Breast Christian hadn't made it. They'd been bros ever since they got into the billet, and now he was gone, dead and gone. Really, Lance Corporal Calhoun couldn't claim Brett's loss at all to himself, since he was basically the big brother to the entire fucking platoon, always ready to listen and store a good advice. True, a lot of the advice boiled down to stop being stupid, but it was still good advice anyway. The smile slid from his face as he remembered cradling Brett's head in his lap, as he remembered watching the mischievous light behind his eyes fade like guttering candles until it was snuffed out forever. Lance Corporal Calhoun looked at the men celebrating, the men contemplating, the men grieving, and took comfort in the fact that he'd taken out the bastard who'd got an anti-tank-sized shot off on Brett, and remembered that every last trooper who went boots down that day helped stop anyone from ever getting killed by the Exarch ever again. Hopefully, anyway. Strike One wasn't a guaranteed success or anything, but at least fewer people would get hurt because of Brett's sacrifice. Because of the sacrifices of the countless other troopers across the front. He cracked another beer and raised it towards the ceiling and murmured, "Hail the victorious dead!" A couple of the other RNI troopers and Navy ratings noticed and echoed him with their drinks. There was enough. Aboard them among the star tides we rage. The systems were running quiet, and pretty much all of the processes were running on automated process. Ophelia wasn't even monitoring them. Sure, Digitans live fast and die young, but that didn't mean that it was easy to see someone killed the way that Marvin the Marveled had. Torn apart line by line just to buy the rest of the Digitan assault team a couple of seconds. True again, they were entire seconds, not milliseconds, and a Digitan could do a lot in the computing space with seconds, and that had been exactly what was needed to restore the enemy AI to its original programming, and thus render it neutral instead of hostile. The fact that Sev could have inflicted horrific casualties in the Republican Navy, and maybe even turned the tide of the battle, made Marvin the Marvel's sacrifice a good trade. Still, he had been her friend, as well as a superior officer, her mentor and teacher. The Organics, especially Lord Admiral Brixton, felt his loss keenly, and Ophelia deeply appreciated that. He'd been a friend to almost everyone in their little war fleet, but they couldn't really understand just how ugly of a death it was. She couldn't explain it to them. There were analogues to organic deaths that could function as a way for them to imagine it, but it would only increase the pain of their grief. It wasn't necessary for them to understand, for them to honor him. They had done their rituals, the Terrans with their toasts, the Star Sailors with their songs, and now it was up to the Digitans. She watched the logs of Marvin the Marvel's losing one Digitan battle against the corrupted Sev in real time. She logged every full second in her memory, and once she reached the end of the logs, she waited for every Digitan salute to go by until nothing followed. Then she added, "Hail, the victorious dead," to the many repetitions already in the logs. As the highest-ranking Digitan who survived the battle, it was her honor to log the final salute. She'd never delete the sorrow of these memories. Aboard the Windy Darling, it was quiet. It was quiet mainly because everybody else was in the mess drinking the alcohol rations for the next 4 months, or in the gym beating the shit out of each other, or in the rec room having their rituals of remembrance and celebrations. Private First Class Emmanuel Sasso sat in his berth and stared at Staff Sergeant Kevin Ossie Roberts' empty berth down the row. It'd stay empty when the rest of the platoon came stumbling back once they were done celebrating, or memorializing, or both. PVC Sasso didn't feel much like drinking, though. If he'd only just been a little bit faster, had his head up a little bit better, then the staff sergeant would still be there. He'd seen the warrior lining up his shot, watching him pull the trigger, but he was too slow in returning fire. PFC Sasso blinked back tears and saluted the empty berth and whispered, "Hail, the victorious dead." In a modest apartment in Portstown on Sanctuary, the sounds of pencils gliding across paper, on an off-key humming of a small girl melded with the low murmur of a forgotten TV in the living room of Esmeralda Dulac, procrastinating, studying by drawing instead. Sure, she had a test in a couple of days, but maths was boring and lame. Besides, she was going to be a famous singer, so she didn't really need to know how to plot algebraic equations on a graph. She stopped her drawing when the voices from the TV caught her attention. Lieutenant Commander Danbury Lake Limited lost her life when her ship, the Ching Li, was damaged in the battle over the Exarcho world. Hail the victorious dead. Her daddy had friends on the Ching Li, and Esmeralda felt a pang of pity for the family of the Danbury lady. The TV people had been reading off KIAs ever since the enemy surrendered, which was why Esmeralda tried to ignore them. She didn't like hearing about how many people got killed in the war. Her daddy was invincible, though, since he was a lost boy, and they were the best fighters in the whole universe. She went back to her drawing and imagined how happy her daddy would be when she showed him her drawing of his ship. Then the doorbell rang. "Mom," she called, "there's someone at the door." "I'll get it. Keep doing your homework, sweetie," her mom called as she swept towards the apartment's front door. Esmeralda tried to look innocent as she watched her mom open the door, and the worst thing possible was standing there in R&I dress blacks. She let out a terrified shriek and dashed her drawing to the floor as she realized her daddy was never coming home. Aboard the ballophone, the pipes thrummed throughout the shuttle bay, where 28 men and women lay unmoving in eternal sleep. The rest of the ship's crew, except for the bare minimum of watch on the bridge, stood in rows in their immaculate dress uniforms and struggled to keep silent as the pipers played God Save the Queen. Some held back their tears, others didn't bother. Able Seaman Arthur Davies was one of the men who didn't bother holding back his tears. Lieutenant Edward Hastings was one of the 26, and the world was simply a dimmer place without the eccentric gentleman in it anymore. If that wasn't worthy of tears, he didn't know what was. The last notes of the song echoed against the bulkheads, and the captain stepped out of the formation to stand facing his men at its head. The crew saluted him. He returned and said, "At ease." The sounds of hundreds of uniforms and boots shifting in the silence was an intrusion of reality against the quiet grief of the Bellerophon. "We have the victory, but the butcher took his due from us. Indeed, we did our bit, and in the face of the cost, I wonder whether our bit was enough. Even so, the whole of the war is concluded, and these 26 helped bring that into reality. Sorrow and pride mingle in my heart, and I believe in yours too, as I did bid farewell to these brave men and women. It is because of these brave souls and others like them that we can say with pride that the coalition of independent planets stood by the Republic of Terra in an hour of need, and that we did not shrink from the price of duty. Hail the victorious dead." The reply was thunderous, though each voice was barely above a whisper. Hail the victorious dead. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.